Welcome. I'm Natalie Bastian, Global CMO of Teads, and I'm joined here today with Paul Woolmington, CEO of Canvas Worldwide. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, thank you so much, Natalie. Great to be hosting this media summit with you and with Brand Innovators. So exciting, 150 brand marketeers, partners, Teads, some clients, and some great conversations. So thank you again. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, wonderful. What a beautiful environment that you've created and what great content that's being shared in thought leadership. And, I can't help but think about the vision that you've set here at Canvas Worldwide and the vision about the customer journey being two direct paths. Can we drill a little bit into that?
Yeah, well, it's fantastic to be hosting this with Brand Innovators and partners like yourself. So thank you. It's such an exciting day to show off our offices as well. But I think journeys are at the heart of it's the spine of all marketing activity. I think a great Marcom plan is based around journeys, and I call that context. So the context of the customer journey, obviously, it's no longer linear. We all know that it's been disintermediated for many years. Obviously, you can leap several stages, but the idea of a journey, obviously, building a brand at the top of the journey, obviously, closing the sale at the bottom of the journey, and every on and off ramp that happens there. But I expand journey. I think that the journey is also the cultural context that we live in. How do people live their lives today? Obviously, we live in a frictionless world, so can we take friction out of, obviously, our marketing communications? Can we take friction out of the customer's experience? How do we keep them in their flow? That's obviously a really important theme today. We're all, empowered by technology. And obviously the data layer. So you've got obviously cultural layer, you've got the customer layer, you've got the data layer. And the data is informing, obviously, our understanding of consumers, understanding their behaviors, understanding points of pain, points of gain. How do we minimize the points of pain? How do we maximize the points of gain? And so that's really context. But if I can elaborate a bit more, I've been a senior fellow at Columbia University on transformative storytelling as well. It's just a kind of sidebar project for many years. And it's kind of interesting. I kind of talk about the 3 C's. So if journeys are context, then I think content and contact are the other 3 C's. So marketing nirvana is when you get content, context, and contact harmonized at every point in the journey. It sounds simple, but it's the most complex item in our ecosystem. Obviously, you've got multiple partners at the table across all of that. You've got the harmonization. So it's like a symphony orchestra. When do you play the brass section? When do you play the violins? How do they come together? It is literally, or another way of looking at it is, how do you improv in a social, how do you play improv jazz together where you are in harmony and yet you are improvising? So you can either take a symphonic analogy, if that's a word, or you can take an improv. But content obviously is the heart. We live in a massive content universe, techniques, KPIs, platforms, environments that obviously require different techniques of content. I can talk about that a little later. Periodic table of content. And the contact point, obviously, again, multiple. At any point in time, you are in multiple environments at the same time, or sequential, or on top of each other, harmonizing. So the complexity of this, so if you talk about context and contact, historically being very much a media agency's domain, I would say it's now media agency's domain to look at everything. What is the right content that may be being created by third parties, being created by creators, being created by so many different aspects in the right context, point in the journey, in the right contact point.
Yes, I love that. So let's drill in. Let's drill in across each of the 3 C's. So first, with content, the definition of content, premium, quality, user generated. There's so many complexities. From your view, what are the challenges, the top challenges that brands are faced when creating content?
It's so interesting because I think if you ask even very seasoned marketeers, name types of content and techniques of content. Often they can describe 10 or 12. I've been building out over many years a periodic table of content. So if you think of the universe that we live in, it's made up of chemicals and it's called the periodic table. So everything is made up of some combination of these elements. So I've used that as a wonderful metaphor for a periodic table of content. So as in your story world, that's our universe around a brand or around a project or around a service. But let's talk about brands. That's your universe of obviously techniques and elements. And those elements are platforms, as I was describing earlier, can be channels, can be obviously attention, it can be environment, obviously social feeds, obviously what you might do in TikTok might be radically different of what you might do in Meta or otherwise. The utilization of technology, the KPIs around content, your KPI against a social platform might be very different from your KPI in a linear OTT, the limitless and obviously, out of home, digital out of home. I mean, obviously. So content is this universe, is this ecosystem. It's a complex ecosystem. That's what, media planning on steroids is, that you actually understand the techniques, you understand the KPIs, you understand the measurement, you understand what's happening, you harmonize it. And that's, that should be the fundamentals of what is media planning turbocharged. 21st century media planning isn't, how many GRPs have you got? That's an important underpinning of it, but it's in service of something. But the other thing I think is you talk a little bit about different uses, and I kind of like describing things that my mother could understand. God bless her. So I also think that there's hero content and there's hygiene content and there's hubs. So I like these simple things, 3 C's, 3 H's. So there's hero content. So that might be an auto show. It could be a documentary movie. It's where you spend a lot more money. It's not always based on money, but you'd spend a lot more time. It could be your brand identity. Could be hero content, how you then roll it out. It could be Olympic sponsorship. It could be, involvement in the NBA. That could be hero content. And I'll go to hygiene. Hygiene is content that's always on. So it's not just, obviously, the transformation was when we had the social age and the digital age. We started, obviously, and it's not a derogatory term at all. Hygiene means this is really important nuggets that you are nourishing, that you're maybe enhancing a on-ramp or minimizing an off-ramp, and that can be obviously different hygiene content. It's not just social, it's just content that's in the market all the time. It can be offers, promotions. So that's hygiene. So you have your hero, might be a Super Bowl spot, it might be a huge conference you put on. If you're a B2B marketeer, it could be auto shows, it could be documentaries, it could be thought leadership as a brand. And then hubs are where it distributes. You want to distribute them through platforms. You want your own platforms. It could be your own website. It could be obviously lots of other platforms. But what the critical thing you have to do is also the ecosystem is you want to distribute the content and ensure there are minimum dead ends. So how many times do we as a consumer see a piece of communication, go somewhere, and then we find that there's a dead end? It's a frustrating experience. It creates friction. It isn't enhancing, keeping me in my flow. So what you want to do, and hero content can create lots of hygiene content and vice versa. An idea can be blossomed from a tactical piece of communication and can become hero as well. Obviously, depending on, cultural resonance, something that really catches fire in culture, and that's important. So it's again to me, it's just a good guiding principle that's kind of simple. But underneath it, there are layers and layers and layers of complexity, which is why, again, you need professional advice. You need great professional advice from partners who understand their platforms, understand technology, understand data, understand how you apply it to these frameworks, whether it's a story world or whether it's, an ecosystem of hero content, hygiene content and where it hubs. What are all those hubs?
Yes, that's so true. And when you think about the types of content and the distribution channels, it's ineffective unless it's in a highly contextually relevant environment. And the power of context is so important, as you mentioned, being one of the 3 C's, the middle one, which I think of is the core to it. And that's where the data element comes into play. And having contextual data applied to content in the distribution environment is truly what will make it effective and allow brands to connect with the ideal consumers. But, you know, one thing around context, and I love the North Star, the mission of Canvas, which is, you know, challenge the comfortable, right? And so I look at the deprecation of cookies as a perfect tactical example of how we apply that. I would love your point of view on that, applying the context and the timeliness of the changes that are happening.
You know, this is the beauty of a mission. We created this idea of challenging the comfortable when we first set up Canvas, and it was meant to be a mission. It was meant to kind of, at least internally, how do we recruit people? How do we get the people that can live a little bit outside their comfort zone? They want to, obviously. But it resonated over the period of time. I think we've just seen in front of our eyes, and accelerated by COVID, the changes in, obviously, our media environments, our cultural environment, the way people live their lives, the way that, you know, technology has in many ways either enhanced life or made life more anxious. You know, what are those impacts? So it resonates. So thank you for mentioning that. We hold it very dear and close to our heart because it's emblematic of our mission with our clients. And I think our clients, it resonates with them because who used to be a competitor is different today than what it was yesterday. The environment of selling and growth is obviously paramount. So that's that. But yeah, I think data and or the application of privacy and or the cookieless future is one of the big pillars and themes that we're all going to have to tackle. It was so interesting. We obviously live in an Apple-driven world, one of the largest companies in the world. I actually think as a consumer, it was a good thing that they allowed me the benefit of choice. I had a choice to restrict cookies, and obviously it was driven very much by Apple, notwithstanding. But what it had was ramifications across the entire industry. Obviously what it did was it upended a lot of economic models. It continues to be a challenge. But that's living outside your comfort zone. So coming back to that theme, it meant that we couldn't be lazy. We had to think of privacy. We have to think of the fundamental rights of consumers, while at the same time understand the application of marketing. So how do we do that in a consumer-friendly way? How do we not turn up like wasps at a picnic? Which I often, a wonderful client used this as an analogy. Marketing was the wasp that turns up and what? I've already bought that barbecue. Why are they still following me as if, you know, my life depended on it? I bought it 6 months ago, but somehow the cookie was still following me and didn't understand that I was at a different point in my customer journey. It's a bad and a good analogy. So I think, you know, to answer it, we're in the middle of this firestorm, and I think that obviously first-party data is obviously going to become a more critical aspect of marketing communication in the future. Fusion with obviously third-party. How do we obviously create new algorithms? How do we obviously work on lookalikes, workarounds? Different client organizations are at different points in their journey to full data adoption. Obviously, some that started at the bottom of the funnel were very, very data literate, very much kind of performance and growth, and are probably better equipped. But in some ways also have their own muscle memory. So their muscle memory is obviously the way that they used to acquire customers, cost per acquisitions, etc. And then obviously, but they're trying to go up the customer journey and the applications of data around brand, but also around a cookieless future, around obviously, holy shit, my customer acquisition went from X to Y, and how do I obviously bring that down? That's obviously a key KPI. And if you were an incumbent brand that you sat more at the top or middle of the journey, they're obviously going down. So the KPIs and the data literacy was at a different evolution. And they're obviously now adopting a lot more bottom of funnel techniques that will inform multiple KPIs on that data journey. So it was a kind of long answer to a very complex question, and I think it will keep evolving. Apple's not going to go away. The cookieless future is obviously, we've been talking about it for the last couple of years, but I think it's exciting because it means we have to solve problems, and some of them are internal problems and some of them are external. So the problem of how we reach customers in empathetic ways, context, content and contact, but also the internal issues of, as an industry, can we come together with the right, harmony around measurement and around techniques that we'll use?
Yeah, at Teads we say cookieless isn't near, it's here. Yeah. And for us, it's very much, we've seen brands been leaning in for years now, but this sense of urgency, I know that we'll continue to gather learnings, but also find accelerated ways to activate quickly because of this now ticking timeline that we're working against. And I think the importance too of brands learning what's working for them, to your point, especially when new brands are applying a brand performance model where the lower funnel meets the upper funnel and you have to find a way for it to work, is even more important now, given even the macroeconomic challenges that are happening, to make those dollars work harder, be more efficient and more effective. To close this out, given the broader macroeconomic challenges, what is one tip that you would give to the brands that are listening today on how to navigate and what to keep doing or to stop doing? Would love to hear your POV.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because we've been through a roller coaster, haven't we, in the last 3 or 4 years? We've been through a boom pre-COVID, then we obviously had an unprecedented, once-in-a-lifetime period under COVID that was actually learning as well. It was huge learning for us, but obviously it created a lot of economic woes for every company in the world, let alone in the US, all sorts of issues. And obviously coming out of it, we've seen some false spikes. We've seen economic models for some companies come back quite quickly, but then there's, what is that? Settle down. And of course, settle down in a high inflation economic environment. We've got the Fed trying to suppress the idea of inflation and what that might mean. So this term stagflation, you've got high employment, and yet you've got questions about spending power in a inflationary market. So we know that. So I've obviously stated the obvious. There are far clever economists and I won't say politicians, I don't think, but certainly economists obviously predicting. But I think some of the guiding principles would be, first and foremost, obviously, you need to grow, you need to sell, and you need to build a brand at the same time. I think the bifurcation of, well, there are certain techniques we use here to sell, and there are certain techniques we use everything's digital now. I mean, essentially, there was no longer this divide of, we use digital techniques, tend to be more lower funnel or a bit more acquisition driven. No, everything's digital. You think of OTT, CTV, how we consume content, even the great out of home has become digital out of home. Obviously, that's the most transformative part of their industry. So everything is digital. So I think that the task today in this environment is to not forget that this is an opportunity to continue to build a brand while at the same time selling at the same time. So how do you juggle and sing? And that's, a great analogy for marketeers today. You can't just juggle in the corner and sing in this corner. You've got to do both at the same time. But never forget that these are transformative opportunities for brands to really make that leap. During times of most people are going to go to cutting budgets. Most people are going to look at, obviously, efficiencies and effectiveness goes without saying, the CFO becomes more important or as important as the CMO. Obviously imperative if you're a public company, your quarterly earnings, how do you do that? How do you sustain? We're not quite sure what the rest of 23 and early 24 is going to, provide for us. But we're not in an economic crisis. We have a healthy environment. And I think it's just reminding companies to innovate. So yes, it might be how do we squeeze more out of our budget, and that might mean more innovation at multiple points, picking our battles, making those battles, because you're never going to win the war. I think there's sometimes this argument, and terrible analogy, that you're in a war and that actually you're going to one day say, I won the war. No, it's a series of battles that marketeers have, whether it's audiences. The multicultural America is such a huge issue and an opportunity at the moment. Who's leaning in there? How are you living your values well? And how do you communicate those values as part of your marketing proposition? And certainly, again, doing both tasks always. And again, it goes back to people at the bottom of the funnel, realize that no longer can I just build a brand on a cost per acquisition. No one ever said when they retired, I'm famous. I built this company on a cost per acquisition of $45 CPA. No. History is made by people that took big, bold bets, and everything was lined up underneath it.
Yeah, I love it. And so don't lose sight of the brands that you need to build and keep focused on it. And then the 3 C's of content, context, and contact.
Yeah.
I love it. You've provided so much wisdom in this short amount of time. We could talk for hours.
Yeah.
I just so much appreciate your time, Paul. Thank you so much for being here and hosting us at the Media Summit today. Really appreciate it.
Natalie, thank you so much for hosting this interview. Wonderful partnership we have, and certainly we're thoroughly honored and privileged to be hosting this summit. So thanks again.
You bet.